The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12-Step recovery and the impact it had in our lives, we do not promote or endorse any 12-Step Anonymous program. It's time for the Share Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host,
On today's episode of the Share Podcast, Bobby, who is currently in his 50s and is now 6 years clean, takes us through 39 years of some of the most gut-wrenching alcoholism and drug abuse a human being should ever endure. When his parents divorce, Bobby stays with his mother until her alcoholism takes its toll, and Bobby asks his father if he can move to California to live with him. During high school, around the age of 16, he learns to play the bass guitar and joins a band. It's at this time that Bobby is introduced to cocaine for the first time, and addiction begins to rear its ugly head. Over the next 30 tumultuous years, Bobby gets married, divorced, loses careers, and is arrested and incarcerated on multiple occasions as a result of his addiction. One day he is found half dead in his apartment by AA members from an alcohol-induced coma and gets rescued by his father. He finds recovery and is clean for 7 years, but relapses only to wind up several years later flatlining on a hospital table after he ruptures his stomach from a massive amount of cocaine and vodka. It's only by the grace of God that Bobby is alive today. It's an intense and compelling story of addiction and recovery. Join us now. Hey, Bobby, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's great to have you on the show today. How are you feeling?
You know, I feel great. It's a great time of year, and my life is good today.
Excellent. You ready to get started?
Ready.
So, Bobby, let's dive right in. Tell us about how your life is today, your hobbies, what you do for a living. Take us into your normal daily routine, including recovery.
Life is really pretty sweet today, actually. Hobbies, I do some review for progressive music on some online progressive rock sites, which I really love a lot. Music is a really big part of my life. I listen to a lot of music. I'm a musician. I play music. What I do for a living has changed recently, and I've been on a 3-month kind of global consultant at large gig in my industry, and I've decided that is over. And I've come back home and hung out my consultant shingle and started my own business here, and we'll see how that goes. My normal routine is up really early. It's funny, I don't sleep probably more than about 5 or 6 hours a day, and I think that's my mind trying to make up for all the lost time that I was up. So I'm up very early, and that's my time. That's my time for prayer and meditation, and then getting myself aligned for my day. My recovery is integral to that. Like I mentioned, I've been on the road for the last 3 years, and meetings are sometimes easy and sometimes not easy to get to. And so conscious contact with higher power has been really essential, and I have found a greater and greater reliance on that. And so now that I'm back home, I've got great meetings I can go to, and I'm really excited about getting into those more and being of service where I can.
Excellent, excellent. Now listen, I've seen the pictures of, actually I just saw you the other day, and I've seen some pictures of you. You look absolutely fantastic, buddy.
Thanks, bro. That wasn't always the case, I promise you.
No, I know, because we've been doing this. I've known you for a long time, and you've seen me at my best and, at my worst.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as weight goes. And, I think this is the best I've seen you, since I've known you.
Yeah, taking care of our physical self is so important, and I know that, you feel much the same as I do, and yes. It's part of the daily routine, and it's so essential, especially, I'm in my 50s now, and it makes me feel a lot younger than the 50s that I'm in, and there's another part of it, I can be of more service when I'm healthy. It's eating right, it's exercising, it's being conscious of what your body is trying to tell you at any given moment, and so it's just essential. And people all the time say, how does it feel getting older? And because it feels a heck of a lot better than not getting older.
I know. You know what? I know exactly what you're talking about.
Now, what's your routine like? Because I see, is it a lot of exercise? Is it mainly diet? What do you attribute it to?
Well, I think since the last time you and I spent any considerable time together, I shaved off about 30 pounds.
Easily.
And so what that was diet, primarily at the beginning.
Right.
And it was portion control, eating smarter, clocking out on the carbs at 2 p.m., which is so very hard. And then I started an exercise regimen. And the old me would have jumped right in, and I've done this previously, and gone for quick gains, and I didn't do that this time. I took a very measured approach to it, with concentrating on doing the weight loss thing first, so that was a lot of cardio, a lot of things that I wasn't able to do. You may recall this, I had a terrible problem with my feet. I literally got to a point where I couldn't walk, and as it turns out, the solution to that was relatively simple. And so I got that taken care of, so I started being able to spend a lot more time on my feet. Then eventually I was able to actually run. So I started running again, and that just peels off the weight. So it was a lot of cardio, and then I used to be real heavy into weightlifting, and I used to be huge, and I'm not that way anymore. I took a regimen approach where I'm doing enough lifting to keep the musculature, but I think as we get older, it's better if we kind of streamline the old corpus a little bit. And so I feel, physically, I think I can't say that it's the best I've ever felt physically, because I do remember my 20s, and those are pretty radical. But, for 50-something, not too bad.
Not too bad at all, brother. Not too bad at all. All right. Well, again, a testament to recovery, a testament to clean living, eating right, getting enough rest, taking care of ourselves, exercise, things we absolutely did not do when we were out in active addiction. So that is a testament to recovery, which pretty much takes us into the next phase as we start going into your past. How much clean time do you have, and what's your anniversary date?
God willing, on February 21st of next year, I'll have 7 years.
Excellent. Fantastic. And how old were you the first time you drank or used drugs? And more importantly, how did they make you feel?
I was very young, 6, 7 years old.
What?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, I come from a long line of dead alcoholics. We'll get into it a little bit more later, but the young ones in the family were pressed into service during cocktail hour, which ironically never really lasted an hour. It was a multiple-hour thing. And so we would be sent to the kitchen to prepare the cocktails for the adults. And, at some point, you become curious. I was curious. And, if you get one, I get some. And so I found myself at a very early age looking forward to cocktail hour. Drugs came much later. Drugs came into play in my teens in Southern California. I was kind of an awkward child. I had it was a broken home. I was kind of reclusive. And I remember very distinctly, my grandfather used to drink Schlitz beer, which is the most god-awful beer, I think, on the planet. The only benefit to the way he drank it was he drank it ice cold. I always remember the first time I drank one of his beers, and how it made me feel was superhuman.
Right.
And I found out much later, of course, that that's an unnatural reaction to alcohol. But it made me bigger, better, faster, stronger, wittier. And, of course, that theme carried on for quite a while.
No, for sure. Well, that gives us a nice little snapshot and a springboard into your story. So we might as well just turn the show over to you, Bobby. It's time for you to share your story, the battle against drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life, when you hit rock bottom, and finally your journey into recovery up until today. So, Bobby, take it away.
Okay, thanks so. Well, as I mentioned, at a fairly young age in Phoenix, Arizona, I was exposed to alcohol. My parents had split up at a fairly early age, and we had kind of lived all over the place. We'd lived in Phoenix and in the Midwest and in Dallas and on the East Coast, and everything finally landed back in Phoenix where family was. So it was my mom and my sister and myself in a condo at the very edge of Scottsdale, Arizona, right against the Indian reservation. I think that area now is actually the 18th hole of a very exclusive golf course. But Mom she was in the school district. She worked as an assistant for Bill Bombeck, who some listeners may even remember, a lady named Irma Bombeck. And she was a columnist for a lot of years, and Bill was a high school administrator, and Mom was his assistant. And Mom was, God love her. She was as alcoholic as the day is long. And I think I mentioned, that my maternal side of the family, just a long line of dead alcoholics. And everything revolved around drinking. It was do what you had to do during the day to get to cocktail hour. Mom was a solitary drinker. She was a social drinker. So and Mom drank to get drunk. And Kristen and I, my sister and I, would watch this, and we just thought it was normal. We thought that's what adults do. Adults get together, it's cocktail hour, and they drink, and then they get funny, and then they get mean, and then they get sloppy, and then, we get in the car with Mom and have a hair-raising ride home at night. And that was kind of life. I did pretty well in school during this time. As I said, I was kind of shy and reclusive. I had a buzz cut back then, back when it wasn't fashionable to have buzz cuts. This is about the time when hair was starting to get long. And I also had really severe buck teeth because I was a thumb sucker. No, it's true. And I held on to that thumb for a really long time, and it caused a deformity in my mouth. So I had to have braces at a pretty young age, and I had them for a long time. It's not like today. They have it down to a real science.
Right.
So, here I am, this polyester pants wearing, crew-cutted, thumb-sucking, buck-tooth kid. And, it's no wonder I'm
picturing it.
Yeah, it's no wonder that I loved cocktail hour. And so I managed to get through Mom went through a series of kind of screwed-up relationships during this time, and that affects you. Not abusive, per se, but just really bad relationships, where, the drinking always seemed to be the thing that ended the relationship. There were some good ones, there were some not so good ones, and so I really didn't have much of a male role model. Dad was living in Southern California. He didn't have a whole lot of time to spend in Arizona, and we didn't have time to get there. So my grandfather was a male role model for me, and Stan was one of the most gentle men I've ever had the pleasure of being with, and I love him and miss him so much. And he helped me a lot. He taught me a lot. But bless his soul, he was as alcoholic as the day is long. And so these were my role models. These were the people that influenced me as a youngster. And some of my teachers who were friends with my mom, I found out, were heavy drinking, because they'd come over and party with my mom. So that was the thing. Drugs, not in the picture. It was all alcohol, because that was the socially acceptable thing to do where I was. I knew of drugs. We would go to the Arizona State Fair every year. I think all fairs had this at one point. And there's this trailer in the back part of the fair. Come see the heroin addict, And it was a scare thing, It showed, what drugs did to you,
There was an actual presentation, or
it was literally a trailer that you walked into, and it was kind of like a cross between Reefer Madness and just Night of the Living Dead. It was screwed up. It was meant to scare. It was meant to. That's what drug education was back then, eh? It wasn't developed like it is today. This is what happens to you when you do this.
Right.
And boy,
that's the only thing they knew how to do. Basically.
Yeah, and
it
scared me. It scared me. But that was drugs, eh? That wasn't alcohol.
Right.
You didn't see anybody with they didn't have any winos in this thing. It was all heroin addicts and guys smoking pot. And so, again, I knew of drugs, weren't a factor in any of my circle of influence. So as I moved through elementary school, I hit a point where I just needed out. I didn't know why I needed out, but I knew I needed something other than what I was getting. And so I talked to my father, and I said, Dad, I'd like to come live with you. Now, my dad at the time lived in Huntington Beach, California, stone's throw from the Pacific Ocean. So this wasn't really a tremendously hard decision for me to make.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. And of course, it destroyed my mom.
Right.
It just destroyed her. And there was some bad feelings for a lot of years. But at the end of elementary school, I moved that summer to Huntington Beach, California. And I remember my last crew cut because I swore to myself. It was ironic. My last day of elementary school, I got my braces off, and I had started growing my hair out against the protestations of my grandfather and everybody else. And so by the time I got to Southern California, I was like being molded for the beach kid that I became. And the first couple years there were just magic. I mean, they really were magical. I still managed to sneak and drink, although it wasn't as big a thing as it would become very soon after that, because there were so many other things to distract me. The ocean, which continues to this day to be one of my fondest loves. You know, I started surfing. I worked in my dad's warehouse, earned enough money for a board. I physically started changing. You know, spending time in the ocean will do that to you. My shoulders broadened, my skin darkened, my hair lightened. And I started looking in the mirror and thinking, wow, where have you been all my life?
You were California, baby.
I was California. I had puka shell necklace. I mean, I can admit that today. You know, but
that's California, bro.
So, and then high school started. And I was not prepared for high school. Socially, I still hadn't developed social skills, et cetera. But one of the things that high school allowed me to do was, in the 70s, in Southern California, we would do parties. And parties is code for let's all get a keg and get drunk and listen to music until the police helicopters come and drive us all away. And that's what would happen. And so everything would be a party. And I started drinking a lot. And I found that I could drink a lot, and I could drink more than my friends, and I could still function. That continued a lot. And then I fell into a crowd that was some musicians. Now, I didn't know a thing about playing a musical instrument. I wasn't interested in doing it in school or anything else, but I was these guys took me under their wing, and I found that I had a natural aptitude for it. We formed a band, and within about a year and a half, I was proficient enough on the bass guitar to actually do a pretty decent job. We had all the right connections. We wrote original music, and so started kind of a different kind of journey, and this is where the drugs started coming into play. We would play in nightclubs in Southern California, and there was, you know, I started smoking pot in high school, and the drinking continued. And then there was I got introduced to cocaine. We've all heard the stories about musicians and cocaine, and they're all true. When, at least it was for me, because drinking was one thing. Pot just kind of made me lazy and hungry. Then this stuff came along, and it was like, where have you been all my life?
Yes.
And then it was, how do I find the balance? You know, it was like chemistry class. Okay, how do I find the balance between the alcohol and this stuff? And how do I make enough money? Because a musician does not make enough money back in the 70s to support a cocaine habit. So cocaine was a treat. But we would always manage to get some before a gig. And, you know, it would carry through about 30, 35 minutes of the gig, and then, you know, you'd start to slide down, then you start drinking, and yeah. And the music thing actually started paying off for us, and we were approached by Geffen Records in 1979.
Wow.
We were asked to do a 4-song demo. This is when Geffen Records was nothing. David Geffen was a friend of our manager, and came to see us one night and said, yeah, you guys got something, let's do a demo. And we said, great, when do we show up and where do we go? He goes, no, you go off and do a demo, and you send it to us, and we'll go from there. So at that point, it became parents mortgaging houses and things like that so we could do this demo, because it's not like it is today. You plug your instrument into a computer, and boom, you can produce studio-quality stuff.
Absolutely.
We produced a 4-song demo, and it was good. It was really good.
You still have that?
I do. Yeah, I've got.
Dude, I want to hear that.
I've got some stuff on YouTube, bro. And anyway, we'll get to that some other time. But so we started living the high life, right? And as a result of this, we started being treated a little differently when we'd gig. And part of that different treatment was a little courtesy table of booze and alcohol and blow. Man, it arrived, and it was on, and it didn't last long, because we did the 4-song demo. You know, everybody's broke at this point. I mean, spiritually, mentally, and financially. we get this note back saying, hey, this is great. We'd like to hear more.
Ooh.
What do you mean more? That's it. That's all we got right now. I mean, all the houses are mortgaged. We're all working 2 jobs. What do you want us to do here? The answer was next. And so that was the end of my musical career. I made a decision at that point that I didn't want to continue doing that because it didn't pay anything, and I liked eating. At that time, I liked eating. And so I left music. And when I say I left it, it's a completely addict thing. It's a zero or nothing kind of thing. I dropped it. I sold my basses. I sold my gear. I stopped talking to the people, and I went to work. And I went to work as compulsively and as addictively as I did anything, and found new friends. And one of those friends introduced me to what we called back then crank. Ooh. And crank, and this was Hell's Angel crank, eh? So Hell's Angel crank is different than, well, I don't know what a crank is like today. Thank God I don't know what it's like today. But back then, this stuff, it was something to behold. And as much as I loved cocaine, I loved crank. And so I started doing that, and I became skin and bones. But, man, I could work like a demon. And that got me noticed. I'm sure that this doesn't happen very often, but the Hell's Angel that was my connection cut me off. He said, you do too much.
Wow, that's impressive.
Right. The guy would not sell me anymore. He knew I was buying for personal consumption. This is a Hell's Angel. They don't really care.
Right.
This guy said, I'm not selling you anymore. You do too much. And I got off crank that way. I got off crank because I couldn't find it anymore. If I could have found it, I would have kept on going and probably died at a very young age.
Yeah. Yes.
So then,
your higher power was already working in your life. Apparently,
through a Hell's Angel.
Yes.
You know, just as a quick side note, that Hell's Angel was gunned down by LAPD back in 1985. He sustained 72 9mm rounds to his body because he was on a combination of crank, PCP, and Jack Daniels.
Oh.
79 rounds before he went down.
It's incredible.
God rest his soul, you know. So now work became the thing, and I worked like a demon. I found a way to get off the crank and started working, and I applied myself very hard to work, and I moved up very rapidly in a company that became eventually a Fortune 500 company. During this time, I would manage to get to work, and I would manage to make it through the day, and then I would manage to get drunk every night. And if I could get high, if I could do other things, because I still had some connections, I would. So that was my life. And the weekends, Friday, it was just start and try to stop early enough on Sunday so I could get to work on Monday. And that's what it was. That was my life. Just getting high, and working. And it seemed to be working in my little pea brain, right? Because I kept on getting promoted. Then the fateful day came where they closed down the operation in Southern California, and they said, Bob, we really like what you do, and we want to transfer you to Omaha, Nebraska. I was like, I don't even know where Omaha, Nebraska is.
Yeah, right?
And so I found it on a map. And actually, I knew where it was. I'd been there, but it was like really looking at it on a map, and it was me going forever. Now, at this same time, my sister developed a very virulent form of cancer. She was fighting that really hard. And so on the one hand, I'm getting high all the time. I'm working. My sister has cancer. She's not going to make it. Now they're telling me I have to move if I want to keep my job. Everything kind of hit a pinnacle one Sunday morning, and I got a phone call, and it was my father, and he said, you better get over here.
Oh.
And, bro, I was so fucked up from the night before that I couldn't get there. And my sister passed, without me. She knew I loved her. She knew I had seen her within the last 24 hours, but I had a chance to say goodbye. I was too messed up to get there. And that cut it for me. That was like, okay, there's nothing left for me here. It's time to go to Omaha, Nebraska. And that's what I did. I arrived in Omaha, Nebraska, Christmas Eve. I forget the year, but it was a snowstorm, blizzard-like snowstorm. Now, I come from Southern California.
Right.
The snow that we have in Southern California, you drive to and you ski on. Okay? And that's kind of the way it is. And so I arrive, I've got no car. I'm going to an apartment that I've never seen before, that may or may not have furniture in it, that may or may not have electricity, and I'm a little skinny on money because I decided to really kind of celebrate before I left Southern California, and I spent a lot of my moving expenses on stuff that, well, has a very short shelf life when you're an addict. So I arrive. Thank God there was electricity. There was some furniture. And thank God that within walking distance, there was a liquor store. I will never forget that Christmas as long as I live. There was no phone. I had no way to contact anybody. It was before cell phones. So I spent I wasn't supposed to report to work until actually the new year. And so I spent from the 24th of December to the 2nd of January in a state, and just new low for me. And that's when I got my first indication of wanting to stop and not being able to.
How old were you at the time?
Early 20s, 22.
Okay.
And it was, I got to stop. And then the little voice says, no, just go get another liter of vodka, bro. And I would try, and then I would start. And that's when the physical aspect of withdrawal started really hurting me. The shakes, that detox from the drug that is alcohol. I remember I said, man, I hope I can shake this off. And of course I did. And my life plugged back in after that, and it became more work, drink, weekends, binge, go to work on Monday. And that was our corporate culture, too. It was drinking was corporate acceptable back then, and it was encouraged in a lot of ways. It was, and this is the Midwest too. You know, there's not much to do. They roll up the sidewalks at 9 p.m. still, and so you go out, you drink, and yeah, you have a good time, and maybe you get into a couple bar brawls, and that's what it is. And you buy a pair of cowboy boots, and I did all that, and I also got married, which was another thing that I thought I had to do. And I married a woman with 3 children already. She was a drinker, bless her heart. She's an alcoholic, not in recovery to this day. And within a year of our getting married, we had a son, who's my boy Alex.
Yes.
And during this time, I had a financial windfall. We were able to do a lot of things, a lot of monetary things. And we did. And then, the money started running out. And our lifestyle, I didn't want the lifestyle to end. And things started getting bad. And things started getting bad in the marriage. And then things got really bad in the marriage. And as a result of that, I had to spend some time in jail. And that whole experience is an interesting side story, and I'll do it briefly. I was in front of a judge several times for a couple different reasons. One was some domestic problems with my wife, and then I got pulled over for DUI, and of course I was drunk as a skunk. And I had a court date, and I decided not to make my court date. And now, judges hate when you don't show up for their court. And what they do is they put out warrants for your arrest. So I was hung over one Saturday morning, and there was a knock on the door, and Sarpy County Sheriff said, you need to come with me. And away I went. Now, ironically, I'd been in front of the same judge all the time. I don't know how this happened, but I think it was a God thing. And the judge's name was Judge Regan. The first time I was in front of Judge Regan, I was in a blue pinstripe suit, rep tie, looking sharp, very remorseful, and the judge gave me a pass. The second time I was in front of the judge, I was in a less elegant state. And as I had subsequent appearances in front of the judge, I finally led up to this one, and this one was orange jumpsuit and shackles.
Oh.
And Judge Regan was paraplegic, and he was in a wheelchair. And I will never forget the look on his face when he saw me come into his court. And I'll never forget what he told me that day. He said, Mr. Godoyne, you are a menace to society.
Oh.
And so away I went for several months. Ironically, I got into the system and cleaned up. And I fell in with a group of guys that were sober in jail. They put me in with these guys. I was the only white guy, which means nothing, but these guys adopted me because my first night in jail was not a happy night, eh? It wasn't.
Oh.
No, it was not a happy night. And these guys took me under their wing. I walked out of that jail, and I had about a 15-mile walk home to an apartment because I'd been kicked out of my house. And on the way between that jail and my apartment was an AA club. And there were people there waiting for me because people from AA had started paying attention to me a little bit because I'd walked in the doors a couple times, right? Most of the time drunk as a skunk. But there was a couple guys in particular that knew where I was, had come to see me, had told me their story. That was my first exposure to recovery, these guys visiting me in jail. And so that's kind of service work, man. It makes an impact. It didn't at the time, as we will shortly discover. So somewhere between the first mile and the 7th mile, my resolve changed as I realized that I still had a couple liters of pop-up vodka waiting in my apartment.
Oh.
And it was on again. And this time it was going to take me to a pretty low bottom. And this is the first time that I can ever recall throwing up blood.
Oh.
And because I was on a steady diet of vodka and Taco Bell bean burritos.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a happy time.
Oh.
And cigarettes, I was smoking like a fiend, and that was my life. I would just drink around the clock. And it was not, let's have an elegant cocktail with ice, a little umbrella sticking out the top. It was, let's take a long pull out of a hot bottle of pop-up vodka. And that was it. That was my life. I found new lows. I discovered how difficult it is to crawl to the bathroom when you absolutely need to go and what happens when you can't get there. Again, throwing up blood and looking in the sink and going, well, that's odd. What did I eat that is red? And that's the depth of denial.
Yes.
That some part of my brain knows that that's blood and that it's wrong and that it's bad. But the addiction part of my head is going, I wonder what you ate that makes it red, bright red. Okay.
Absolute denial.
So that's where guys from AA found me, on my floor in a puddle of vomit and feces and, cigarette burns all over me. I know now how they got there, and it was a real God thing. And they picked me up, and they cleaned me up, and they took me to an indigent detox.
How'd they find you?
My ex-wife had been trying to get a hold of me. The phone was cut off, and she wasn't about to go and try to track me down. So she knew these guys in AA because their wives had talked to her, and I later found out, it's like, she needs to be in program too. I said, yeah, okay. But she called one of these guys, and 2 or 3 of them showed up for a 12-step call, and that's where they found me.
Wow, that is, your whole story is riddled with God shots.
Yeah, no, and there's more to come. I am very clear that there is a God, and he's been, for whatever reason, he has been guiding me along this thing. And it's been an interesting road, but it's been an insightful road. So they took me to the indigent detox, and they didn't think they could keep me because my vitals were so bad that they thought I was I was having grand mal seizures, and they just didn't want to keep me because they figured I was going to stroke out. And they weren't prepared to offer me any kind of medication to help ease my detox because that's not what they were about. And they suggested that I go to a hospital. And somehow or another, I convinced them to let me stay, and they did. And that was a rough 72 hours. In the meantime, I had made contact with my father in California, and he flew from L.A. to Omaha. And at the end of day 3, and they said, "You've got a visitor." And I walked out, and I'll never forget the look on my dad's face. It was just utter horror and disbelief. And where is my son? And he just put his arms around me and he said, "Let's get out of here." And that sounded like a good idea to me. It was the wrong thing to do because I needed to stay there. But I left with him. We got out of there. And we got back to my apartment, and that was another horrified look on the old man's face. And he said, "What do you want to do?" And I go, "I don't know." And so that was the first time I just kind of went, I don't have any control. I don't want to drink. I'm really screwed up. I can't think straight. I need somebody else to make decisions for me. And my dad said, "Okay, you have to stay with me. I can't leave you alone because I don't trust you. And I don't want to come back and find you dead." So we went and rented a U-Haul, one of the kind you can drive. We came back, and we loaded up whatever I had left, which wasn't much, into this U-Haul, and we started a cross-country trek from Omaha, Nebraska, back to Huntington Beach, California. And I will never forget, and I'm detoxing, eh? Right next to my dad. God. There were no secrets between my father and I after that trip. I remember crossing the border from western Nebraska into, I guess it was Colorado, and the reality hit. Okay, I'm leaving Nebraska. And it's like I got a sudden onset of Tourette's, man. I was just like swearing and cussing, and we spent a couple very uncomfortable nights. I found out what the little green men were, the elephants, except they weren't elephants. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible detox. What I'd found out later was somebody at the Indigent Detox Center slipped my dad a couple Valium and said, if he gets too far out of hand, if you think you're going to lose him, give him one of these. And so the second night it got really bad, and my dad said, I want you to take this. And immediately I was better, right? And it was that feeling again. It was like, I like this. And my dad paid attention. And so the next night, like I'm putting on a little bit of a show, and he goes, I'm not giving you anymore.
Right. I see where this is
I'm not giving you anymore. So just forget it. I flushed whatever I had left. I said, okay. So I arrived back in Southern California after a 3-4 day trip. I looked as terrible, and my stepmother looked at me with the same horrified expression. And all I could do was I walked out of the house, and they said, where are you going? I said, I need to walk to the beach. And they're like, oh, my God, he's going to, I had no money. I had nothing. I barely had clothes to put on my back. I was bankrupt in every sense of the word. And I did. I walked to the beach, and it was a fall, Southern California, windy afternoon. I sat down in the sand, and I just started crying. And I go, what the hell am I going to do now? And I stayed there for a really long time. And when I got back to the house, my stepmom said, there's somebody I want you to meet. He's in AA, and he's my boss's sponsee. These were familiar terms to me, but I still didn't really know.
Right.
And so I met Joe D., who turned out to be my first AA sponsor. And I met him. He was living out of his car at the time. And he pulled up, and it was an old Lincoln town car. And he pulled up the next morning, and his very gruff Italian voice said, get in. And I got in, and he looked at me, and he goes, you look like shit. And he looked at me, and he said, listen, I really don't want to do this. You've got a shot if you do what I suggest you do. If you don't, fuck you and get the hell out of the car.
I love this guy already.
Oh, to this day, he's 35 years sober and still that way. And I just gave myself completely to Joe D. I went to meetings every day, 2-3 times a day. And I started working steps, and I did the steps with Joe, and my life started getting amazing. I still had nothing. I would ride a bike, like 5 miles to and from meetings 3 times a day, and I was happy, and I wasn't drinking. And that was the first time that it was like, holy shit, I don't have to do that. There's another way. Then things started coming back into my life, and it was amazing. And that's when Costa Rica came up. And I got the opportunity to come to Costa Rica, and I stayed, and all was really good until I stopped going to meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And that was here in CR, where I live today. I stopped going to meetings. And that, I'm very clear, that was the beginning of that end. And after a time of not going to meetings, I was single at the time, and I had this girlfriend, and she smoked pot. She knew I didn't, and she knew I didn't drink. And one night I just went, well, I'll just smoke a little pot. And I did. And then I go, well, what else can I do? So I tried a little cocaine. And I had a really good paying job, so I could afford to buy drugs. And I started doing all kinds of things. But I wasn't drinking. I was still sober. Right. Still sober. No. I was doing everything else but drinking.
But drinking. Yes.
Okay? And, of course, all the things that happen, I don't want to get into them, but your nose starts getting destroyed, and you don't sleep for days. Then you have to start taking opiates, because you're in so much pain, and then you're shucking and jiving. And during this time, I got rid of the girlfriend and got involved in another relationship, started my own business, which utterly failed because we were snorting all the profits, and decided to get married. Yeah, decided to get married. And so on our wedding night came that fateful moment when I had a drink. And I was doing all the other stuff. I was doing, the Bolivian marching powder. I was doing anything that would keep me high. Then I took that, I'll never forget either. I managed to dodge to the back of the reception and poured myself 2 fingers of Absolute, ice cold Absolute. And I'm checking it out because everybody knows that I'm getting high, but they know I'm not drinking. So I'm still doing the right thing, right? If you can believe that. Okay. And I remember slamming the first 2 fingers of Absolute, and that reaction, that abnormal reaction happened again. It cascades down your esophagus and explodes with that burst of atomic energy in your stomach. And by the way, normal drinkers don't feel that.
No.
Okay? That's how an alcoholic's body reacts to it. And it was on. It was on. 2 months later, I was flatlined on a hospital bed with my insides open because I had managed to rupture my stomach. Now, this is kind of an interesting story. I drank and drank and drank and continued to do all the other things and reached a point where I could not leave the house. And I started having these odd pains that I'd never had before. And one night, after a particularly robust session of consumption, I'm laying in bed, not sleeping, mind you, just laying in bed, and I felt a tear in my abdomen, inside.
Oh.
And I thought, well, that's odd.
That's odd.
And I was so medicated that the true extent of the pain didn't hit me. But through all of the things that I had put into my body, there came this searing pain. My solution, of course, was to consume more.
Oh, wow.
And so I poured some vodka on it, and it got bearable. But the time between having to medicate and the pain returning became less and less over the next couple of days. And I found myself in that place where I'm on the floor again, and I can't walk. My only relief is I'm in a shower running boiling hot water over me because I'm trembling like a leaf, and I'm still high in all this. At night, when and people are starting to get concerned about me around the house, but it's just like, I'm a sneaky user, right? Nobody sees me using, but I'm using like a bandit, all right? And so when night falls, that's the magic hour, because for some reason, the cover of darkness just lends itself to all kinds of further bad behavior. And everybody would be asleep, or they would be otherwise occupied. This is the 5th night after I felt this tear. I told myself, if I can just stay on my feet, I'm okay. So I was doing laps around my house. Oh, you've been to my house. It's a kind of a big circular thing from the kitchen to the dining room to the living room.
Yes.
In fact, I was doing laps, a staggered step at a time, in pain. And I would reward myself. If I made a lap, I'd take a big slug of vodka.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. The next morning I woke up and I looked at my wife and I said, I think I'm dying. What do you want to do about it? And I go, I'm not sure. Now, the clear answer is call an ambulance and take my sorry ass to the hospital. My answer is, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. It's fucking insanity.
I'm not sure. Let me have another beer and think about it.
Oh, my God.
Now, what's going on inside of me is every time I'm ingesting a chemical, it's going down into my system and escaping out what is now a 4-inch rift in my stomach.
Oh, my God.
And so these shots of alcohol and drugs are going into my stomach and then being directly exposed to my internal organs at this point. Okay.
I don't know how you're still alive.
I tell you what, another, God working in my life. Finally, the pain got so bad. This is how they got me to the hospital. They tricked me, those bastards. They tricked me. I was in such pain that I had this doctor. He was kind of a shaky doctor anyway, but he was a guy that I used to score opiates from. And I called him and I said, man, you got to come over because something's wrong. And he comes over and he goes, God, you look like shit. I heard that a lot. I actually heard that a lot during my music. Man, you look like shit. And I said, you got to give me some, what's your symptoms? I said, I got a stomach ache. Stomach ache. And he looked at my wife and he goes, okay, I'm going to give you some morphine. And I went, yay. Because as I loved opiates, I was eating opiates like M&Ms, right? But I knew the morphine was going to be like super. And so I was like, yeah, let me take down my drawers here. And he goes, no, you don't have to do that. Yeah. So what he did was he shot me with a vitamin shot.
He tricked you.
He tricked me, that bastard.
I love it.
So I'm waiting for it to go away. I'm waiting for it to all be better. I'm waiting for that moment when, the chemicals take over and I can get back to being a junkie. And it never came. And that's when I had the moment and I went, oh, I really am dying. And I really was. And so finally I had a moment of clarity and I said, call the ambulance. And they put me in the ambulance and they got me to the hospital. And that's when they shot me full of opiates. And it was better. And that's the last thing I remember for about 48 hours. And I woke up the first time, and I looked down. I was in a hospital, and there was this pack on my stomach, and it was this gauze-covered lump. And my doctor was standing over me, and he goes, how you feeling? And I go, I don't know. And I go, what's that? Pointing to this thing on my – and he goes, that's your stomach. I said, it's on the outside. He goes, yes, it is.
Oh, on the outside?
On the outside, bro. It was too swollen to put back. My insides were so, all my internal organs were so swollen. Once they opened me up, they couldn't get them all back in. So, unfortunately, that lends itself, when you're in a hospital, to infection. And infection is what I got. And I got a real bad one, the kind that kill you. I have to go back a second. During my laps around the living room, somebody would bring me food every once in a while. And the last meal I recall eating was a McDonald's cheeseburger.
Oh, Christ.
Okay, so what they found when they opened me up, the sesame seeds that are on the bun? Yeah, well, those little bastards were scattered throughout all my... Yeah. And one of them, a couple of them, they didn't find. And they started decaying in there. And then I got this other infection, and they had to open me up a couple more times. And I could remember writhing on a very uncomfortable hospital bed, waiting in queue for like the third surgery, and begging these two nurses to kill me. Just, can you please kill me? I don't want to live anymore. Can you please kill me? That's a famous surgery where I actually woke up in the middle of the surgery. And I open my eyes, and I see all these gowned and masked folks. And I look up, I recognize my doc. And he kind of looks over at me. And then he looks back at me, and he goes, he's awake. They couldn't keep me sedated enough because I had developed such a high tolerance to chemicals. They couldn't keep me sedated long enough without putting me at risk otherwise for an increased dosage of anesthesia. And then I made the mistake of looking down the table. And there's something a human being should never have to see. And that is looking down and seeing literally all of their vital organs outside their body.
Oh, it's like a horror movie.
Yeah, they were hunting for the sesame seeds, bro.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So this was my life for like a week, in and out of surgeries, and then I had this other infection. At some point along the way, the line just went flat. Going into what happened to me when that happened, because I'm very clear about what happened, is a whole nother story, and I won't go into it. But I assumed room temperature, and they had a tough time bringing me back. But bring me back they did. And I was in an induced coma for 45 days as my body tried to heal itself, and I can remember and I'm gumming off drugs throughout this whole thing too. Okay?
Right.
And they're not giving me anything to help with that. So I'm on no pain medications except for like over-the-counter stuff. And I've had 4 surgeries, coming off dope. They're not doing anything for me there, and it was hell. And then I died and went through all that. And I remember a couple times, again, faces of loved ones and what I did to them and what I put them through. My son looking at me and, seeing tears streaming down his face, and my father's face and my wife's face as they're watching me literally die. And the damage and the wreckage that causes, you don't forget that when you see your child dying. You don't forget being taken, and I remember seeing this. I was barely conscious, and my wife being taken out of the room and the priest coming in the room. And that's, that was one of the times when I just went away. But I survived, I survived. I managed to, once again, Bobby ekes out another win, And after a time came that fateful day when my doctor came up and he said, hospitals are for sick people. We're kicking you out. And wow. And it's like, okay. It's like the same thing. I get out of jail. I've got a 15-mile walk home. I get out of the hospital. I'm standing outside the hospital because I'm out processing paperwork and there's problems and whatever, and I just want to be outside. Oh, I had a couple collapsed lungs during all this time, too, and I was on a respirator. And you know what? All I can think about is having a fucking cigarette.
Oh, my God.
Okay, so now,
sick.
4 months of utter hell, hospitalization, death, release from the hospital. First thing I want to do is use nicotine. Within 24 hours of my release from that hospital, I was drinking again.
You have got to be kidding me.
Within 48 hours, I was chalking up lines. Yeah, because my doctor, we addicts are great. We hear what we want to hear. My doctor, I go, okay, well, what do I do now? He goes, you're all better. You're good. Okay? And that's all he goes, don't drink. But I didn't hear that. I stopped listening after, you're all better.
You're all better now.
Yeah.
Oh.
So within 48 hours, I'm calling my Bolivian marching powder dealer, and he's going, man, we heard you were dead. I go, you heard wrong. And so then it was on again. It was on again. What was different? There wasn't a lot of funding, so I couldn't do all the things that I wanted to do, but drinking was easy. And I drank and I drank and I drank and I drank and I drank, and I started having those symptoms again. One day, I was stumbling around up in my music studio where I am right now. I ran into a carton of old books that I didn't recognize, really. And I knew I had moved it up here. I didn't know what was in it. Well, it turns out it was some books from my mom. Oh, what the hell? I open it up. And I'm digging through. I found an AA Big Book.
There you go. There it is.
And I opened it up, and it was from, the inscription on the inside was from a lady named Jolene L., who was a friend of my mom's way back in the day. The inscription said, Judy, that's my mom's name, Judy, you're in this book, but read it anyway. My mom had a big book. Never knew that. I still have that big book. And at that moment, I decided that I was done again. And so at that point, there was another detox. So I actually did, which I don't recommend to anybody listening to this podcast, I actually started a process of tapering myself off of alcohol and was relatively successful at it. And the only reason I was successful at it is because of one thing. I have, to this day, a huge ego. Okay? And my ego, my soul, my purest heart knew what I needed to do, which was get to a damn meeting. But my ego wouldn't let me do that. Okay? So I went into this thing where I said, I'm going to do it myself. And I started tapering off. And over the next 2 weeks, I started tapering off, and I scored a job during this 2 weeks, working for a mutual friend of ours' father.
Okay.
And he knew what I was. Of course, I lied to him and said I wasn't completely off the booze yet, but I was far enough off where I could carry on lucid conversations. And he hired me, and he goes, look, the requirement for this employment is, I'm not there, but you're going to have to go to at least one meeting a month. And I go, 1 meeting a month? I could do that. and so I stopped. I stopped drinking. Okay? I white-knuckled it for the next 28 days. this mutual friend of ours, father, told his son, our mutual friend, what our deal was. And I get a call from our mutual friend, and he goes, yeah, my dad says you got to go to one meeting a month. That's going to be one meeting a day.
Nice.
You can start tonight.
Wow.
And I said, well, I've checked on, the AA meetings, because he goes, you're not going to AA.
You're going where you belong,
I said,
brother.
Oh. And so that was my first night at a place that your listeners are coming to know by way of our shares, and that was my first night at the Vigilance Club, and I was 28 days abstinent. I walked in. I could not make it past the door jam. People that you and I both love were in that room that night. They let me stay there. The reason I didn't allow myself to get to a meeting is because I knew there was going to be people there that knew me. That's that ego, the diseased ego that's always trying to kill me.
Yes.
The solution is in the rooms. The solution is in the steps. The solution is the connection that we have with people who have the same malady that we do and are sharing our experience, strength, and hope, the things that we have in common. And that's our strength. And that's what my disease was hanging on to, going, don't go there. Don't go there. Because my disease, and I hate to personify the disease because it's not an entity, but my disease knows where recovery is. And my disease wants to do everything in its power to keep me away from there. Because once I'm into recovery, it becomes irrelevant. It becomes a factor in my life, but it doesn't run my life anymore. And so that night, I stayed underneath a sign that said, expect a miracle. And that was my first meeting back. And after a couple meetings, I remembered what it was like to be in recovery. And the friendship and the love and the similarities and not the differences. The fact that our fellowship shouldn't work. I mean, by all rights, it shouldn't work. But we have steps. We have a program that shows us how to regain our lives and how to be of service in other people's lives. We have traditions that govern our society, and we have concepts that govern our organization. And I started just immersing myself in meetings. And I was in, at least, well, there was only 2 meetings a day, and I was in both of them for a year. I did 2 meetings a day for a year. And sometimes I did more because I'd sneak over to the AA group. And I got service commitments, and I got a sponsor, and I started working steps. And I started living again. Man, whew. And it's a beautiful thing. You don't do it alone. I met you and I met others. You all put your arms around me and were strong for me when I couldn't be strong and showed me how to do it again. And I found myself 365 days after that first shaky night, picking up my 1-year medallion and having a completely different life again. And since that time, I've stayed. For the next 3-4 years, I was very, very active in the Vigilance Club. I sponsored guys. Some didn't last long. Some are doing amazing, and they have lives. And, in our reading today, it talks about giving back and what it means to give back and what it's like when we get there. What I took away from today's reading was, and I expressed this to some folks with a little less time than me today, is, look, we got a little secret here. Those of us who've been around for a while, when we're nice to you and we're trying to help you, it's a real selfish reason, is because we get way more out of it than you do. This program is one of those things where the more you give, the more you get. That was proven to me over time. About 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to go off into the world and do some things, and I did. I'm not proud of this at all, but I think it's part of my story and I need to share it. Over the last 3 years, I have been to a handful of meetings, and it's not always that there weren't meetings, although there were certainly places in the world that I went where there weren't meetings, but there were different meetings. I don't badmouth other groups or how they do things or anything else, but it wasn't for me. And as I reflect upon it now, the answer was very clear. What I should have done was try to bring solution, and I didn't do that. So how did I stay clean? Conscious, constant contact with higher power. I just lean on God today. He's never dropped me on my head. When I've completely given myself to spiritual principle and realize that I am utterly powerless if I'm running the show, thoroughly continue to work the third step. If for a guy like me, I got to do 1, 2, and 3 every day because I'll forget. I forget all the time. It's like suddenly, hey, I've got all the answers again, and I don't. I don't have all the answers. But I know where the answers are, and I know where to get them. And they're in literature. They're on walls in meeting rooms. They're called the steps. They're in the good relationship I have with guys with time in the room. They're in one-on-ones with my sponsor and my sponsees. That's where my solution is. That's where I need to stay today because that's where my life is. Anything else is not life. And let's face it, with a track record like mine, I mean, if I was a cat, I'd be on life 10. And I'm really clear today that if I, for some reason, made an extremely bad decision to waltz out the door and decide to do something else, that'd be it. And I'm not going to do that today. Once again, February 21st, God willing, I'll have 7 years, which ironically is about the same amount of time I had before I relapsed last time. So I'm paying attention. I'm getting back into meetings, and I've got a sponsee again, and I'm working the steps again with a new sponsor that I'm having. If there's a recurring theme here, I guess, in my recovery is when I'm in program, when I'm in recovery, when I'm actively involved in the good things that this program has to offer me, my life is outstanding. When I'm not, my life sucks. That's my story,
Oh, I'm almost speechless, but you know me. Bobby, thank you so much for sharing your experience, strength, and hope with us. That was an amazing story and absolutely inspirational for all of our newcomers. In your entire story, and this is one of those stories where when anyone listens to this, but newcomers especially, there are so many moments in there that God was reaching his hand out to you and saving your life. And all these years later, there's a reason why he did that. There's a reason, Raquel mentioned it and Shane mentioned it in their share, and they don't know why, and I don't know why, and you don't know why. Why we were the chosen few. 1 in 10 make it, roughly. That's the statistic I've heard. So very few of us make it. There's those chosen few, and we don't know why, but I'm pretty sure I know why I got a second pass, and it's to be of service. Your story is such an unbelievably incredible story of hope that if what you went through, you survived, is absolutely a miracle, and only by the grace of God that you're here. I'm so happy that I was able to get your story. And I remember when we talked about this and you discovered the podcast and you're like, oh, this is amazing. This is fantastic. And I'm like, first thing I thought was, thank God Bobby loves it because I'm dying to get his story. This is one of those stories where if you listen to this and you don't get it, then
keep coming back.
Just go back out, all right? Because you obviously haven't been through enough pain. Because this is everything you need to hear to know that, you know what, there's no way to win. There is no way to win out there. The only survival, the only way to find a life today is through this program. I wouldn't be here today, and neither would Bobby without this program. So again, brother, thank you so much.
You're welcome, man. Thank you very, very much for letting, every time we get to share ESNH, it uncovers more things. And out of this, I tell you what, if there's one thing that I'm sitting here feeling right now, and after you tell your story, if you're not feeling gratitude, you need to figure out why, because I have a small answer to that big question. Why? Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's because we're supposed to give back. And
yes.
This podcast is, in this day and age, our verbal history of NA and AA and other recovery programs has evolved, and it's morphed into this type of conveyance and this type of mechanism. And if this reaches one person, then win. Success.
Absolutely. It's absolutely what it's all about. So, Bobby, let's keep this spirit alive, and let's go into the next section of the program, which I call For the Newcomer. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to ask you 5 questions about early recovery, and you're going to respond with inspiring and insightful answers you can share with our newcomers. Are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
All right, here we go. Number 1. What was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced to recovery?
The insane belief that I could successfully use again.
There it is. That's it. That's it in a nutshell. And I think for many of us, that's what keeps us out there and
for sure.
in the insanity.
For sure.
Yep. So number 2, at what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery when you accepted that you were powerless over drugs and alcohol, but for the first time had developed the hope that you could recover?
Interesting. I have to go back to my AA days and those nights and days when I would ride the 5 miles back and forth to the Newport Alano Club. And one evening, I was riding back from a meeting, a late meeting. It was a Friday night candlelight meeting. And I was riding along Pacific Coast Highway, and I realized that I was out of smokes. So I zipped off the path real quick, crossed PCH, ran into a store, grabbed a pack of smokes, got back on my bike, and I'm pedaling away. And I realized that I had just walked into a liquor store and had not seen the booze.
Wow. That is an aha moment.
And I thought, holy cow. And then it was a domino effect, because at that point, it was like I got these trip hammer hits about, holy cow, it is working, it works. And that was a real epiphany for me. And, you know, at that point, my drug of choice at that time had lost my phone number, and I knew it.
That is absolutely beautiful, man. I love it. Yeah, there it is. And number 3, do you have a favorite book you would recommend to a newcomer that you read in early recovery?
Yeah, all of them. But, and I can't stress this enough, I'm a reader, so literature is really important to me, and all of our approved literature. But there is a book that is especially close to my heart, and it's a book called A New Pair of Glasses, and the author is a fellow by the name of Chuck C. And Chuck was an original old-timer in California. He wrote this book, and I can't really express in any short amount of time what this is, but it's like Chuck talks about, he tells a story, and then he talks about what recovery is like for him. Now, this book is, oh my gosh, it's got to be,
It's old.
Chuck's been dead for 25, 30 years, but it rings true today, and I would recommend it for anybody in recovery, regardless of the fellowship that you attend.
Yes, absolutely. It's already been recommended a couple of times. It's a wonderful book.
It truly is. And Chuck, ironically, well, kind of cool, Chuck is my great AA grand sponsor.
Oh, get out of here.
Yeah. I mean, we do keep track of lineage. It's important, right? And so when my first AA sponsor, Jody, said, you know, Chuck is your great grand sponsor, right? I said, no, I've not. Okay. Is he around? No, he's dead. I'm like, okay. Well, it's cool though, right? I mean,
listen, man, we love our stories.
It works for generations and generations, you know.
It's still working.
Yeah.
And number 4, what is the best suggestion you have ever received?
It would have to be from my gruff old Italian AA sponsor, and it was Rule 62. And those of you who are listening who are not familiar with what Rule 62 is, Rule 62 is don't take yourself so damn seriously.
I absolutely love it. This one you will find on the show notes on the page. Absolutely beautiful suggestion.
If you Google Rule 62, there's a whole backstory behind it, but essentially it's don't take yourself so damn seriously.
Perfect. Yeah, we can all take a page out of that book. Yes, for sure. Okay, number 5. If you could give a newcomer only one suggestion, what would it be? 90
meetings, 90 days.
Works for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that there's a thing that if you do that, you're going to know by the end of the 90 days whether you can stay or go.
Yes, absolutely.
And so our program is all about building foundations and building on top of those real strong foundations. And for me and for countless others, that formula seems to work.
Yeah, absolutely. You make 90 meetings in 90 days, and if at the end of those 90 days you're not completely satisfied, we'll gladly refund you your misery.
Absolutely. Go back out there. Let me know how it is. You know, I love hearing the stories because it's like listening to myself talk, you know. And unfortunately, sometimes they don't make it back.
No, they don't.
I mean,
you shouldn't have made it back, bro.
No, look,
you're a walking miracle.
Let's face it. This disease is a killer.
Yes. And
I am one of the lucky ones. You know, I had to die, but I got to come back. Many don't. And lest God help me if I ever forget that my disease wants me dead.
Well, God's got big plans for you, brother, because that story of yours, it's meant to inspire.
Well, again, if one person gets anything out of this, mission accomplished.
It will. I'm confident of it. Bobby, great suggestions. And before we say goodbye, I have one more question for you. Of all the meetings you have attended anywhere in the world, which one is your favorite, and where is that group located?
Well, I think this is going to sound familiar to your listeners. It's got to be anything that happens at the Vigilance Group in Costa Rica, in Sabana, Costa Rica. That's my home group. I call many meetings there my home group. And if you're ever down our way, come on in. The door's always open.
Yep. Bobby and I will take you.
Yeah.
All right. We have reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida.
All right, brother. Thanks, Bobby.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Share Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.thesharepodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then.